My name is Frank Dawson. I'm 66 years old, and I've lived in the same blue-collar neighborhood of Toledo, Ohio, for most of my life. I'm not what you'd call a flashy man. I never owned a luxury car, never took fancy vacations, never chased after anything I couldn't afford. But what I did have was mine, earned with grease-stained hands and years of honest labor. For 4 decades, I worked at the same manufacturing plant, fixing machinery, troubleshooting engines, and doing overtime whenever it was offered. I took pride in knowing that every dollar I brought home came from effort, not shortcuts. When I was younger, I dreamed of being a pilot. Life had other plans. My father died when I was 16, and I had to drop out of community college to help my mother pay the bills. The factory job was supposed to be temporary, just until I got back on my feet. But then Diane happened. I met her at a church picnic. She had the brightest laugh I'd ever heard, and eyes that could stop you mid-sentence. Within a year, we were married, and suddenly, that temporary job became my life. For 30 years, I believed we were a team. Diane and I raised 2 kids, paid off a modest home, and survived our share of storms. There were late-night arguments, sure, and years when money was tight, but I never once doubted her loyalty, or mine. We didn't have a glamorous life, but it was stable, safe. I worked. She took care of the house, did bookkeeping part-time. Sundays were for yard work and barbecue. Summers meant long drives to visit her sister in Michigan. We were simple people, living a simple life. Looking back now, I think I confused routine with trust. I thought that just because something's been standing a long time, it means it's built strong. But termites work quietly. You don't see the damage until the whole thing's ready to collapse. That's what my marriage was. 40 years of wood eaten from the inside out. And I didn't notice until it was too late, but I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I got here, how a man who gave his entire life to his family ended up vanishing without saying goodbye, you need to know where it all started. Before the betrayal, before the heartbreak, before the revenge, because every story of survival begins with something breaking. And mine started the day I walked into work expecting another normal shift and walked out with a cardboard box in my hands. The day I lost my job started like any other. I got up at 5:30, made myself a black coffee. Diane had long since stopped getting up with me, and kissed her cheek before heading out. She barely stirred. I drove the same 15-minute route I'd been driving for decades, past the same diner, the same gas station, the same rusted-out overpass covered in graffiti. I always parked in the far corner of the lot. Habit, I guess. I liked the walk. Gave me time to think. That morning I was thinking about the water heater. It had been making noises again. I figured I'd check it out when I got home. I should have known something was off when I walked in and saw the plant manager waiting by the break room. He wasn't the kind of guy to hang around. His tie was crooked and he looked like he hadn't slept. Behind him were 2 guys from corporate I'd never seen before, standing with clipboards like vultures. That's when I felt it. That quiet, sinking feeling in my gut. The kind you get when a storm's about to hit, but the sky's still blue. A few hours later, it was official. They were shutting down the plant, moving operations overseas. My position, and every position like mine, was being eliminated. I was handed a severance packet, a weak handshake, and a thin smile that said, "Good luck out there." I packed up my locker in silence. A wrench set Diane gave me on our 20th anniversary. A framed photo of me and the guys at our last Christmas party, my thermos. That box felt heavier than it should have, not because of what was inside, but because of what it represented. 40 years of sweat, loyalty, and late nights reduced to cardboard. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just walked to my truck and sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, wondering how the hell I was going to tell my wife. You see, work wasn't just a paycheck for me. It was my identity. I wasn't a man who sat still or waited for someone else to fix things. I was the fixer, the provider, the one who always had a solution. And now I felt like a tool with no function. left in the rain to rust. I didn't go straight home that day. I drove aimlessly for over an hour, thinking maybe I could find an idea, a plan, a purpose. But all I found was silence. Eventually, I pulled into the driveway. Diane was inside folding laundry in front of the TV. She barely looked up when I walked in. "You're home early," she said, her voice flat. I opened my mouth to tell her what happened, but I couldn't. Not yet. Something told me to wait, to breathe, to think. Because deep down, I had a strange feeling that losing my job wouldn't be the worst part of this chapter. Diane and I got married in the summer of '81. It wasn't a big wedding, just family and a few close friends, with folding chairs under a rented tent and a buffet table Diane's aunt set up herself. But to me, it was perfect. She wore a plain white dress with lace around the sleeves, and her hair was curled just the way I liked it. I remember thinking I'd hit the lottery. Diane was sharp, organized, ambitious in her own quiet way. She could walk into a room and make people listen, not because she was loud, but because she always seemed like she had it together. Back then, I didn't care about anything fancy. I just wanted to build a life with someone who wanted the same things: a home, a family, and peace. We moved into a small 2-bedroom rental on the edge of town and spent the first year of marriage figuring each other out. Diane worked part-time at a dentist's office, while I did double shifts at the plant to save for a down payment on a house. It wasn't glamorous, but we made it work. Our first big purchase together was a used washer and dryer set from a guy I knew at the plant. She was so proud of those machines, said it made her feel like we were really building something. Looking back, I think that was when I felt closest to her, when we were struggling, scraping by, and leaning on each other like teammates. Then came the kids, first our son Michael, then our daughter Grace 2 years later. Becoming a father was the single most terrifying and fulfilling experience of my life. I remember holding Michael in my arms for the first time, his tiny fingers wrapping around my thumb and thinking, whatever happens, you're my reason now. From that day on, everything I did, every long shift, every skipped lunch, every car repair I took on to save a few bucks, was for them. Diane took to motherhood naturally. She kept the house clean, made school lunches from scratch, joined the PTA. She wasn't warm, not really, but she was dependable, efficient, the kind of woman who always knew where the spare batteries were and never missed a parent-teacher meeting. For a while, we were a unit, not perfect, not romantic, but steady. We had traditions: Sunday pancakes, fall pumpkin carving, summer road trips in a beat-up minivan with a busted AC. Diane was always the planner, the scheduler. I was the quiet one, driving with one hand on the wheel and the other hanging out the window, just grateful to be with my family. I wasn't the dad who made big speeches or showed up with surprises. I was the guy who fixed the sink at 10 p.m., who picked up shifts on holidays so the bills stayed paid, who showed up at every softball game even if I had to come straight from work in dirty boots. But slowly, as the kids got older and needed us less, things between Diane and me started to shift. The little moments we used to share, a quick kiss in the kitchen, her asking about my day, me bringing home her favorite chocolate when I stopped for gas, started disappearing. We stopped talking about anything that wasn't practical: the house, the kids, the bills. It was like we turned into business partners instead of a married couple. I chalked it up to age, to routine, to the fact that we were tired. I never once thought it meant she didn't love me anymore. The truth is, I was so busy providing that I didn't notice we'd stopped connecting. I thought loyalty and time were enough to keep a marriage alive. I thought if I kept doing the right thing, showing up, staying faithful, working hard, that it would be enough. I didn't realize that to Diane, I had become something else entirely. Familiar, predictable, maybe even boring. But I wasn't the kind of man who chased affection or begged to be noticed. I believed in endurance. I believed in staying the course. So I just kept going, even when I felt like I was walking alone. Now, when I look back at those years, I don't feel anger. Not yet. I feel disappointment. In her, in me, in the fact that two people who once vowed forever could sleep side by side for decades and still drift so far apart. But that's the thing about silence. It doesn't make a sound until it's too loud to ignore, and by the time I finally heard it, the damage was already done. I always thought I'd retire on my own terms. Maybe take a cake from the break room, shake a few hands, and walk out the factory doors one last time with my head held high. That was the dream. After 40 years of showing up early, never calling in sick, training new hires, and working through holidays, I figured I'd earned that. But life doesn't always wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it just slams the door and leaves you standing on the other side without a warning. That's exactly what happened to me the day the company handed out envelopes instead of paychecks. It started with rumors, whispers in the locker room, upper management taking closed-door meetings, a few suppliers pulling out. I ignored it. I didn't want to believe that the place I'd given my life to could shut down overnight. Then came the announcement, cold, corporate, and full of phrases like global restructuring and cost efficiency. They said it wasn't personal. They always say that. But it felt personal. To me, it felt like betrayal, like being thrown away after serving your purpose. I remember sitting in that metal folding chair across from the HR rep while she read from a script, eyes glazed over, like she'd done it 50 times already that morning. She slid the severance papers across the table as if they were doing me a favor. 3 months' pay and a packet about career transition services. That's what I was worth after 40 years. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, folded the paper, and left. The only thing louder than the sound of my boots walking out was the silence that followed me all the way to the parking lot. When I got to my truck, I sat behind the wheel for a long time, just staring at the factory. The place looked the same brick walls, same rusted loading docks, same smell of oil and metal in the air. But it wasn't mine anymore. I didn't have a place in it. My keycard didn't even work. That hit me harder than I expected. It was like I'd been erased, like I was never really part of it to begin with. I thought about all the birthdays I missed, all the nights I came home too tired to talk, all the weekends I gave up to finish a job that someone else now called non-essential. I didn't go straight home. I drove around town aimlessly for a couple hours, taking streets I hadn't driven in years. I passed the old roller rink where Diane and I had our first date, the park where we used to take the kids when they were little, the diner where I used to get lunch before they raised the prices too high. Everywhere I looked, memories followed me, and yet I felt like a ghost, watching my own life through a rearview mirror. When I finally got home, I didn't tell Diane what happened. I don't know why. Maybe I was ashamed. Maybe I needed to process it first. Maybe I already knew, deep down, that telling her would be the beginning of the end. She didn't even look up from her magazine when I walked in, just asked if I could fix the garbage disposal before dinner. I told her I was tired and went to the garage instead, sat in the same chair I'd used to change the oil in our cars for years, and just existed. That night, lying beside her in the dark, I stared at the ceiling and realized something that still haunts me. I didn't belong anywhere anymore. Not at work, not at home, not even in my own bed. And worse, no one seemed to notice. At first, Diane acted like nothing had happened. She still went about her days as usual, getting up early, going to her part-time job at the dental office, cooking dinner and managing the household. But there was a shift beneath the surface, subtle at first, like the way a storm builds quietly before breaking. She started giving me sideways glances when she thought I wasn't looking. Her smiles became tighter, less warm. The casual conversations we once had dwindled to practical exchanges about bills and chores. I remember the first time she snapped at me over something small. I'd forgotten to take out the trash, and instead of a reminder or a joke, she just stared at me with cold eyes and said, "You're not even trying anymore, Frank." It stung, but I brushed it off, thinking she was stressed. The stress of losing my job weighed on both of us, after all. But then came the sharp remarks, comments about how I smelled like grease all the time, how I didn't look like the man she married anymore, how I was dragging the whole family down. She stopped asking about my day, stopped inviting me to sit with her on the porch in the evenings. The house, once a place of comfort, felt like a silent courtroom where I was always guilty of something I couldn't name. I tried talking to her, tried asking if something was wrong, but Diane just shrugged and said, "I'm tired, Frank. You should be too." It was like she was blaming me for the situation, but also for how she was reacting to it. Even worse were the nights when she started going out more often. At first, it was just a girls' night once in a while, which I told myself was normal and healthy. But then those nights became more frequent, and she'd come home late, smelling of perfume and something I didn't recognize. I never confronted her directly. I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the truth or if I was too proud to admit what I suspected. I just felt like a stranger in my own house, a man whose role had been replaced by someone else. The kids noticed too, but they didn't say much. Michael was busy with his new job, and Grace was in college several states away. I think they were trying to protect me from the truth, or maybe they didn't want to admit that their parents' marriage was crumbling. Family dinners became rare, and when we did eat together, the silence was thick enough to cut with a knife. Diane's smiles were rare, and her eyes seemed to carry a secret I wasn't meant to see. I found myself retreating into the garage, fixing the lawnmower, tinkering with the old motorcycle I'd been restoring for years. It was the only place I felt like I could breathe. Alone with the engine parts, the smell of oil and metal, I could pretend the world hadn't changed, that I was still useful, still a man who mattered. But every time I came back inside, the coldness was waiting for me like a shadow. It was then that I started to realize something I was too afraid to admit. Diane was slipping away from me, and no matter how hard I worked, how much I tried to hold on, she was already gone. The woman I'd loved and married was becoming someone I barely recognized, and I was left standing at the edge of a life I no longer belonged to. As Diane drifted further away, I found myself retreating deeper into silence. The house, once full of laughter and noise, now felt like a hollow shell. Even the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder in the quiet. I stopped trying to talk, stopped asking questions. Every word I said felt like it bounced off an invisible barrier between us, dissolving into emptiness. I was there, but I might as well have been invisible. I spent hours in my chair by the window, watching the world go by. Neighbors waved, kids played in the yard, and life moved on outside while I was stuck inside my own head. The people I once chatted with at the plant or at church seemed like strangers now. The familiar routines that used to comfort me felt meaningless. I wasn't just losing my job, I was losing my place in everything I'd known. Sometimes I caught myself talking to the walls, or whispering the same thoughts over and over just to hear a voice other than my own. "What happened to us?" I'd ask the empty room. "Where did you go, Diane? Where did I go?" But there was never an answer, only silence. And the silence was suffocating. My kids noticed the change, but they kept their distance. Michael's calls became shorter and Grace's visits less frequent. They were living their own lives, and I didn't blame them. I wasn't the man they remembered anymore. I was a shadow of that man. I wanted to reach out, to tell them everything, but pride and shame held me back. I wasn't ready to admit that the foundation of our family was cracking. The more I withdrew, the less Diane seemed to care. Our interactions dwindled to necessary conversations about bills or groceries. Even those felt forced, like two people negotiating a deal rather than sharing a life. I wondered if she felt the same emptiness, or if she had already moved on in her heart. The thought tore at me worse than any argument ever could. Nights were the hardest. Lying in bed beside her, feeling the space grow between us, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder how we'd ended up here. How two people who promised forever could become strangers sharing a home. I never raised my voice, never begged her to stay. I just wished she'd notice me again, even for a moment. But that moment never came. Instead, the silence stretched on, long, cold, and unbroken. The first time I felt real doubt was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Diane said she was running errands, and I was left alone in the house, the familiar silence pressing in on me. I was fiddling with the old radio in the living room, trying to get the static to clear, when I noticed her purse sitting on the kitchen table, something I'd never paid much attention to before. Curious, maybe desperate for a distraction, I glanced inside. There, tucked between receipts and loose change, was a small envelope with a name I didn't recognize: Tom Parker. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a client from her part-time job or a new friend from church. But the way my stomach twisted told me otherwise. I tried to shake the feeling, but it lingered, crawling into every quiet moment. That night, when Diane came home later than usual, smelling faintly of perfume I hadn't smelled in years, my heart sank. I wanted to ask her, to confront her, but the words got stuck in my throat. Instead, I watched from the shadows as she talked on the phone in hushed tones, laughing softly, a sound I hadn't heard from her in a long time. It was like she was a different person, one I didn't know and didn't recognize. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The warmth we once shared had been replaced by secrets and shadows. I started noticing other little things. Texts flashing on her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, quick glances at the screen, hurried conversations cut short when I entered the room. Every time I asked if something was wrong, she brushed it off with a tired sigh or a vague, "It's nothing," but I knew better. The truth was there, simmering just beneath the surface. One afternoon, while helping her carry groceries, I found a receipt for an expensive dinner at a restaurant I'd never been to. Diane claimed it was a work dinner, but the name on the receipt was from a place far from any dental office meetings. The evidence piled up like bricks, each one heavier than the last. My mind raced with questions, but fear kept me silent. I wasn't ready to face what I already suspected. Still, I clung to hope. Maybe this was just a rough patch. Maybe Diane was stressed or unhappy, and things could be fixed. But deep down, I knew that hope was fragile, a thin thread stretched tight and ready to snap. The doubt was no longer a whisper. It had grown into a roar I couldn't ignore. The day I confirmed my worst fears is etched into my memory like a scar. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a shouting match, nothing like what you see in movies. It was quiet, almost clinical. I was cleaning out the glove box of my truck when I found it. A crumpled receipt for a hotel downtown. The date was recent, just a week ago. My hands shook as I unfolded it, staring at the name and the address, knowing exactly what it meant. I felt the air leave my lungs. I decided I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it would hurt. That evening, when Diane left the house saying she was going to meet some friends, I stayed behind. I pulled out her phone while she was gone, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't proud of snooping, but I felt like I was drowning and needed something to hold on to. The messages were there, texts and pictures exchanged with a man named Tom Parker. He wasn't just a friend or a co-worker, he was her lover. Reading their conversations was like watching a slow-motion betrayal. They talked about secret meetings, weekend getaways, and plans to sell our house so they could move to Florida together. The words burned me from the inside out. How long had this been going on? How had I missed all the signs? I felt like a fool, blind and powerless, but beneath the pain, something started to stir, a cold, hard resolve. I didn't call Diane when she got home. I waited, letting her walk into the house unaware that I knew. I wanted to see how far she would go, how comfortable she felt in the lie we'd both been living. That night, she came to bed late, smelling like a different woman, perfume, cigarettes, and a confidence I'd never seen before. When I asked her where she'd been, she lied straight to my face, and for the first time, I didn't even try to hide that I knew. In the days that followed, I watched her more closely. The late nights out, the hushed phone calls, the texts hidden behind her back. She thought I was too broken to fight back, too lost to care. But I was planning. Quietly, Patiently, I was planning, because the story wasn't over. Not yet. And I wasn't going to be the one left holding the pieces. I realized that knowing the truth gave me a kind of power I hadn't had in a long time. I wasn't just a victim. I was a man who could choose his next move, and I was ready to make it count. What Diane didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd been quietly preparing for years. Not with plans for retirement, vacations, or early exits, but with something more practical. Ever since I was a young man, I never trusted banks or quick fixes. I saw too many friends lose everything overnight. Pensions disappearing, savings vanishing with market crashes, houses lost to foreclosure. I decided early on that I'd build a safety net nobody could touch. I started small. A few gold coins here, some silver bars there, tucked away in a locked box beneath the floorboards of the basement. I took night classes on investing, learned about stocks, bonds, and real estate. Whenever I had a little extra cash, instead of spending it, I put it into discrete accounts and shell companies under different names, mostly my late brother's. Diane thought I was just a frugal man, maybe even a little stingy. She had no idea about the secret empire I was quietly assembling. By the time I lost my job, I had more than enough to start over, millions hidden away in assets that no one could trace back to me. It wasn't flashy or public, but it was mine. Mine to use when the time was right. I never bragged about it, because it wasn't about showing off. It was about survival. And now, survival was exactly what I needed. I never told Diane about this. I kept it from the kids, too. They thought their old man was just a hard-working, stubborn mechanic who never had much to spare. They had no idea that behind the worn coveralls and grease-stained hands was a man who played the long game, a man who refused to be beaten by life's cruel turns. This secret was my power, my safety, my revenge waiting to happen. Diane could cheat, lie, and plan to take everything from me, but she could never take this. And with it, I could walk away from the wreckage on my own terms. I knew that once I decided to act, there would be no turning back. But for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Not just hope to survive, but hope to thrive, to reclaim the life I deserved, the life I'd worked for in silence. And so, I began to prepare. For years, I watched as Diane managed the household finances, never once suspecting that I had my own plans tucked away from her eyes. I kept receipts, documents, and contracts in a hidden safe in the garage, a safe she never knew existed. It wasn't just about money, it was about control, about having a lifeline in case everything else fell apart. I had learned early on that trust is fragile, and sometimes the only person you can count on is yourself. I remember nights spent poring over financial statements and investment books, scribbling notes by the dim light of the garage. My hands were often too tired from the day's labor, but my mind was restless, fueled by a stubborn determination to never be powerless again. While Diane was out socializing or working her shifts, I was quietly building a fortress no one could breach. There were moments I wondered if I was being paranoid or cold-hearted. But those doubts were fleeting. Every time I heard about layoffs, foreclosures, or retirement funds wiped out by bad decisions, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just saving money, I was saving my dignity. I was creating a future where I wouldn't have to beg or plead, where I could choose my path no matter what others did. And now, that future was within reach. The factory was gone, my marriage was crumbling, but my secret fortune was untouched. It was a strange comfort, knowing that while everything else burned around me, there was a safe place, a hidden reserve of hope and strength. I just had to decide when to use it. After discovering Diane's betrayal and knowing I had this secret fortune tucked away, I faced a choice that kept me awake for countless nights. Should I confront her and risk a bitter public fight? Should I try to salvage what was left, hoping for forgiveness or change? Or should I quietly slip away, using my hidden resources to build a new life far from the lies and heartbreak? Pride warred with pain inside me, But deep down, I knew that silence was my strongest weapon. I started making plans carefully, in the quiet hours when the house was empty and my thoughts were loudest. I updated legal documents connected to my assets, ensuring everything was in order and protected. I researched places where I could start fresh, far away from the neighborhood and the memories that suffocated me. Montana called to me, a place I'd once visited with friends, rugged and open, a perfect spot to reclaim myself. I kept these thoughts locked inside, revealing nothing to Diane or anyone else. At home, every day became a careful performance. Diane's icy stares and sharp words cut deeper now, but I no longer reacted with anger or pleading. Instead, I smiled politely, nodded, and kept my distance, all while my mind raced with thoughts of freedom and justice. I imagined the moment I'd walk away from it all, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices without a penny, without a home, without my forgiveness. I buried my feelings beneath layers of calm. I fixed the broken appliances, mowed the lawn, made dinners, tasks that distracted me from the storm raging inside. Friends and neighbors asked if I was okay, but I just shrugged, saying I was tired. No one saw the fire in my chest, the cold resolve growing stronger every day. I was preparing for something much bigger than myself, a reckoning. I thought often about the kids. Would they understand why I left? Would they blame me? Could I forgive Diane and myself for letting it come to this point? The questions haunted me, but I pushed them aside. This wasn't just about money or betrayal. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my life, on my own terms. Late one night, I packed a small bag with essentials. Clothes, important documents, a few personal mementos, nothing flashy, just enough to survive and thrive. I double-checked the house, making sure everything was as it should be. I didn't want to leave a mess or a clue. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a declaration of independence. Before leaving, I stood at the doorway, took a deep breath and looked back at the life I was walking away from, the years of hard work, the broken promises, the shattered trust. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't write a letter. I knew some stories are better ended quietly. As I stepped outside, locking the door behind me, a strange sense of peace washed over me. I was no longer a victim. I was a man in control. What Diane didn't know was that I was already winning. The morning I left, the house was still cloaked in darkness. I slipped out quietly, careful not to wake Diane or the neighbors. For years, I had been a ghost in my own home, seen but never truly noticed. Now I was finally becoming one in the world, a man disappearing not by accident, but by design. As I closed the door behind me for the last time, I felt a mix of sorrow, relief, and a strange excitement for what lay ahead. I didn't have a destination in mind at first, just the open road and the promise of freedom. The truck I had been restoring sat in the garage, ready for this moment more than I ever imagined. With the keys in hand, I drove out of Toledo, watching familiar streets fade into the rearview mirror. Every mile felt like shedding layers of an old skin, a lifetime of pain, betrayal, and disappointment slipping away with each turn. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by a job, a marriage, or even a name. I was just Frank Dawson, a man with a second chance. I stopped at small diners, slept in cheap motels, and let myself breathe without the weight of expectations. The silence was healing, but it also gave space for memories to creep in, bittersweet and sharp. I thought about Diane, about the life I left behind, and about the secret fortune that would allow me to start over. I knew the disappearance would cause a stir, calls from my children, questions from neighbors, maybe even police reports. But I was ready for that. I'd arranged everything so Diane couldn't access the accounts or the properties tied to my hidden wealth. It was my final act of control, a safeguard against being dragged back into a life that had long since turned toxic. Days turned into weeks, and I settled into a quiet routine. I found work as a mechanic in a small town nestled in the foothills of Montana. The air was fresh, the pace slower, and the people kind but cautious of outsiders. I didn't talk much about my past. Instead, I let my work speak for me, fixing engines and earning respect with calloused hands and honest sweat. Letters from my children arrived occasionally, filled with confusion and hurt. I never responded. I needed distance, space to heal without dragging anyone else into the mess. I hoped one day they would understand why I had to disappear, that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is walk away. At night, when the sky was clear and the stars stretched endlessly above, I'd sit on the porch of my small rented cabin and reflect on how far I'd come. The road hadn't been easy, and the future was uncertain, but I was free to rebuild, free to live on my own terms. And that was worth more than anything Diane ever took from me. Starting over wasn't easy. The silence of my new life was sometimes overwhelming, like a vast, empty canvas staring back at me, but it was also full of possibilities. In Montana, the mountains stood tall and steady, a reminder that even after storms, the earth remained unbroken. I found solace in the steady rhythm of work, turning wrenches, tuning engines, and helping people who appreciated honest labor. For the first time in years, my hands weren't just tools of survival, they were instruments of renewal. The small town where I settled was unlike Toledo. Folks greeted me with cautious smiles, strangers curious but respectful. I kept to myself mostly, though I made a point to stop by the local diner every morning. The owner, a kind woman named Martha, listened without judgment when I spoke, offering coffee and a warm smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that connection still existed, even when everything else seemed lost. I found a small cabin to rent on the edge of town, surrounded by pine trees and open sky. It wasn't the mansion Diane might have dreamed of, but it was mine to shape, mine to fill with new memories. I painted the walls myself, fixed the creaky floors, and planted a small garden. Every little improvement felt like a victory, a step away from the shadows of my past and toward a future I could call my own. Slowly, I began to heal, not just physically from years of hard labor, but emotionally from the wounds of betrayal and loss. I let go of the anger that had burned inside me and replaced it with quiet determination. I forgave Diane, not for her sake, but for mine. Forgiving her freed me from the prison of bitterness and allowed me to focus on building a life worth living. I didn't reach out to my children. They had their own lives, their own pain to process. I hoped in time they'd find their way back to me, but I knew that had to come on their terms. For now, I concentrated on the present, on waking up each day with purpose and gratitude. Each sunrise was a chance to rewrite the story I thought was over. The community slowly embraced me. I helped neighbors with repairs, volunteered at the local church, and even started a small group for men dealing with life's hardships. Sharing my story, bit by bit, became a way to connect and heal. It reminded me that pain wasn't a prison, but a bridge to empathy and understanding. Some nights I still thought about Diane and the life we lost. I wondered if she ever regretted her choices or felt the weight of what she left behind. But I no longer carried that burden. It belonged to her, along with the memories we shared and the love that had faded. In this new chapter, I found strength I didn't know I had. Strength to live, to love, and to hope again. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it was mine to travel. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, casting golden hues across the valley, I found myself sitting on the porch with a notebook in hand. I began jotting down memories, not the painful ones, but small victories and lessons learned. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to untangle the knots in my mind. It helped me see how far I'd come and how much further I could go. I started volunteering at the community center, offering my skills to help fix things around town. It wasn't about recognition. It was about belonging. The smiles and thanks I received from neighbors slowly chipped away at the walls I'd built around myself. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was part of something again, even if it was just a small town tucked away in the Rockies. Occasionally, I received postcards from my daughter, Grace. Short notes filled with tentative hope and cautious affection. They weren't frequent, but each one was a thread that connected me back to family. I saved them in a box beneath my bed, a reminder that even broken relationships could have moments of light. There were days when the weight of everything pressed down hard, when the past tried to claw its way back into my thoughts. On those days, I reminded myself that healing wasn't linear. Some mornings I woke feeling strong and ready, others fragile and uncertain. But I kept moving forward step by step, embracing the imperfect journey. Through it all, I learned that starting over wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about carrying it with grace and using it to shape a better future. Each dawn brought new challenges, but also new chances to grow, to forgive, and to find peace. Months had passed since I'd left Toledo, and just as I was settling into my new rhythm, the unexpected happened. One late afternoon, while I was fixing a neighbor's old pickup truck, a car pulled up slowly on the gravel road leading to my cabin. The vehicle looked out of place here, shiny, polished, and too clean for this rugged landscape. My heart skipped a beat. Visitors were rare, and I wasn't expecting anyone. The driver stepped out, a man in his late 40s, dressed sharply but with an uneasy look in his eyes. He introduced himself as Mark, claiming to be a private investigator hired to find me. My first instinct was to deny everything, to tell him he had the wrong man. But something about his presence unsettled me. He wasn't here for a friendly chat. Mark told me that Diane had hired him. She wanted to locate me, to talk about the unfinished business between us. I could feel the old anger rising, but also a strange flicker of curiosity. What could she possibly want now? Had she realized what she'd lost? Or was this another move in her game to control and manipulate? I listened carefully as Mark explained that Diane was in trouble, financial problems, debts piling up, and her new relationship falling apart. She wanted to make a deal. I wondered if this was her way of trying to claw back what she had lost, or just a desperate plea for help. Either way, I wasn't sure if I was ready to open that door again. For a moment, I considered walking away, shutting the door on the past once and for all. But the questions in my mind were too loud to ignore. Could this be a chance for closure, or was it a trap? Trust was something I'd lost long ago, and rebuilding it wouldn't be easy. Mark's presence stirred memories I thought I'd buried. The good times, the promises, the dreams Diane and I once shared. But beneath those memories was a steel resolve. I had built a new life on the ruins of the old, and I wasn't going to let it crumble now. I told Mark I'd think about what Diane wanted, but I made it clear I wouldn't be rushed or manipulated. He left with a warning. Diane wasn't the woman I remembered, and her motives might be darker than I suspected. As the car disappeared down the road, I stood there alone, torn between the past and the future I was still fighting to build. As Mark talked, I noticed the subtle signs of exhaustion and tension in his face. This wasn't just a routine job for him. He seemed conflicted, like he didn't fully agree with what he was being asked to do. He mentioned how Diane had promised him a large sum if he found me quickly, but that something about the case made him uneasy. I could tell he wasn't the type to just blindly follow orders. We talked for a long while, and I probed carefully, trying to read between the lines. Mark hinted that Diane's financial troubles were worse than anyone had expected. She had been gambling, making risky investments, and even borrowing from people I hoped she'd never get involved with. There was a desperation in her situation that went beyond simple regret or heartbreak. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of pity. Maybe this was the woman I'd loved once, trapped in a web of her own making, but that pity was quickly replaced by a deeper, colder resolve. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. Mark asked if I wanted to send a message or negotiate terms. I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I wanted to reopen old wounds or let her fall without a net. But the idea of closure, of finally putting an end to the years of pain, was tempting. I realized that forgiveness wouldn't come easy, but neither would total destruction. When Mark left, I felt a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. The past had come knocking, uninvited and unexpected, and I had a choice to make, whether to open the door or keep it firmly shut. But deep down, I knew that whatever decision I made next would change everything. A few days after Mark's visit, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled in Diane's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, unsure if I wanted to read the words or throw them away unread. Inside, Diane made an offer. She wanted to meet and talk about a way to fix things, to find some middle ground. She claimed she was sorry, that she regretted everything, and that she was desperate to make amends. The letter felt like a trap and a lifeline all at once. After years of silence and betrayal, I wasn't sure if I could trust her or if this was just another manipulation. Yet, the part of me that still remembered the good times, the moments of laughter and love before everything fell apart, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for reconciliation. I thought long and hard about what to do. Meeting Diane could open old wounds, but it could also bring closure or even a fresh start. I weighed the risks against the hope, knowing full well that either path could lead to heartbreak. I decided to write back, agreeing to meet, but on my terms. I needed to be the one in control this time. The meeting was set for a small cafe in a neighboring town, a neutral ground, far from the ghosts of our shared past. When Diane arrived, she looked different, worn and tired, but with a flicker of vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. Her eyes searched mine, hoping for forgiveness, but also bracing for rejection. She spoke honestly about her mistakes, the debts, the loneliness, and the consequences she hadn't anticipated. For the first time, I saw a woman who wasn't trying to hide behind excuses or lies. She was raw and real, and it shook me to my core. But beneath the remorse was a clear agenda. She wanted access to my secret fortune, to bail herself out of the mess she'd created. I listened carefully, weighing her words against the pain she'd caused. Part of me wanted to help, to be the man I once was, the forgiving husband who believed in second chances. But the man I'd become was cautious, hardened by betrayal and experience. I told her plainly that if there was to be any future between us, it would have to be on my terms. The conversation ended with no promises, only an uneasy truce. Diane left with a glimmer of hope and a weight of uncertainty, and I was left alone with the knowledge that my life was about to change again. This proposition was more than a chance for reconciliation. It was a crossroads where I had to choose between mercy and justice. After my meeting with Diane, the weight on my shoulders felt heavier than ever. I spent restless nights turning over every word she said, every look in her eyes. Was there truly remorse, or just another attempt to manipulate me? The doubt gnawed at me, but beneath it all, a part of me longed for closure, or maybe something more. I realized that to move forward, I needed to take control once and for all. I began tightening my grip on my finances, transferring funds to new accounts under layers of protection. I consulted with a trusted attorney, someone who understood the importance of discretion. This was no longer just about protecting money. It was about safeguarding my future, my freedom. Diane might have been scrambling, but I was building a fortress. Then, unexpectedly, an opportunity came my way. A small local business was up for sale. A classic garage with loyal customers and a strong reputation. It was exactly the fresh start I had been dreaming about. With my secret fortune, I made the move and bought the place. It was more than a business. It was a symbol of reclaiming my life on my own terms. The community welcomed me warmly. Word spread quickly about the new owner who had a story to tell, one of resilience, of rising from ashes. I wasn't just a mechanic. I was a man who had refused to be broken. Each day brought new challenges, but also new reasons to hope. I felt alive again. Diane's attempts to contact me grew more frequent, but I kept my distance. I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Instead, I focused on rebuilding the trust I had lost in myself. Slowly, my children began to reach out, hesitant but genuine. I welcomed them cautiously, knowing that mending those relationships would take time. One afternoon, as I was working on an old engine, I got a call from Mark, the private investigator. He told me Diane was in deeper trouble than she let on, and that her new partner was involved in something dangerous. It was a warning, and I knew it meant the past wasn't done with me yet. Despite everything, I felt stronger, more prepared. The man who left Toledo was gone. In his place stood someone ready to fight for his future, his dignity, and his peace. The turnaround had begun, and this time I wasn't looking back. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, like a storm gathering strength before the inevitable crash. Diane's world was unraveling faster than I expected. Mark's warnings were clear. Her new partner was involved in shady dealings, and the law was closing in. I watched from the sidelines, knowing this was the moment I had been preparing for all along. With my lawyer's help, I filed the necessary paperwork to secure every asset I owned, ensuring Diane wouldn't lay a finger on a single dollar. The million-dollar fortune I had hidden so carefully was finally mine to use. No more secrets, no more hiding. I felt a surge of power and relief. This was justice, measured not in vengeance but in wisdom. Then came the call from Diane herself. Her voice was shaky, desperate, begging for a meeting one last time. She promised change, pleaded for help, but I knew better. I wasn't the man who'd blindly trusted her anymore. I told her coldly that her time for apologies was over. The path she chose led nowhere but ruin. As weeks passed, the authorities closed in on Diane's partner, and the truth about their illegal activities surfaced. Diane's name was dragged through the mud, her financial empire crumbling alongside her lies. Meanwhile, I quietly rebuilt my business, my relationships, and my life. My children, once distant and skeptical, saw the man I had become. Not the broken victim, but a survivor and a fighter. Slowly, they returned to my life, bringing healing to wounds I thought might never close. Family dinners, shared stories, and quiet moments of forgiveness filled the spaces that betrayal had once carved. Looking back, I realized that my secret fortune wasn't just money. It was a lifeline that gave me the strength to walk away, to start over, and to claim the life I deserved. Diane's betrayal was a painful chapter, but it couldn't define my story. In the end, I found peace not in revenge, but in resilience. The man who lost everything came back stronger, wiser, and free. And that was the real victory. The quiet mornings I spent on the porch of my rebuilt garage became my sanctuary. Watching the sunrise over the mountains, I reflected on how far I had come from the man who was blindsided by betrayal. The pain still lingered beneath the surface, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it fueled my determination to live honestly and fiercely. One afternoon, my daughter Grace visited, tentative at first, but with a softness in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. We sat together, sharing coffee and stories, slowly bridging the chasm that had grown between us. It wasn't a perfect reunion, but it was a start. A fragile thread weaving us back together. Moments like these reminded me that healing was possible, even after the deepest wounds. Diane's downfall played out in the news, a cautionary tale of greed and poor choices. I never gloat over her misfortune, but I felt a sense of justice served. She had been given chances, too many chances, but had chosen destruction instead of redemption. Her loss was a bitter reminder of what happens when trust is broken and respect discarded. As my business flourished, I hired a few local young men who needed work and guidance. Teaching them not just about engines but about perseverance and integrity gave me a renewed purpose. It was my way of paying forward the hard lessons life had taught me, hoping to steer others away from the paths I had traveled. I also reconnected with old friends, people who had stood by me before the fall. Their support was a balm to my weary soul, proof that loyalty could endure even the toughest storms. Together, we shared laughs and memories, grounding me in a community that felt like home. Every night, I wrote in my journal, recording the journey, the pain, the victories, and the unexpected joys. Writing helped me make sense of the chaos and cherish the moments of grace. It became a testament to resilience, a story not just of survival, but of triumph. Looking back, I understood that the fortune I'd hidden was never just about money. It was about hope. Hope that no matter how dark the night, the dawn would come. It was about strength, the strength to walk away, to rebuild, and to reclaim my life with dignity. In the end, I wasn't defined by betrayal or loss, but by the man I chose to become. A man who faced his past, embraced his future, and found peace within himself. That was my real victory, and it was worth every hard-fought step. Thank you for listening to my story. Life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes betrayal comes from those we love most, and the road ahead seems impossible. But what I've learned is this: no matter how deep the wounds, no matter how dark the night, there is always a way to rise again, to rebuild, to reclaim your life on your own terms. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's that true strength comes not from what others do to us, but from how we choose to respond. Forgiveness, resilience, and hope are powerful tools. They don't erase the pain, but they can heal it. Remember, you are never alone. No matter what you're facing, there is always a new beginning waiting for you. Sometimes, the hardest steps lead to the greatest victories. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And as always, thank you for being here. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and keep moving forward.